Alright, we're going to be picking up with the Fugitive Slave Act. I told you that was the last part of the Compromise of 1850, and now the Slave Act. The Fugitive Slave Act stated that police and citizens in free states, mostly in the North, of course, were required to help return any runaway slaves. And if they refused, this would be punishable by law. Now, this was the most controversial part of the Compromise of 1850. Some saw this as the government protecting slavery. But remember, this is really the only way they can get the South to agree to allowing California to be a free state. But many runaway slaves and even free African Americans were sent into slavery in the South after this law's passage. Abolitionists often challenged this law. And then you did have some resistance to this law furthered by Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin. We talked about Harriet Beecher Stowe already and her book a little bit. But her book did depict many personal situations about slaves and the horrible treatment of them. And so it's going to get Northerners and abolitionists even more passionate about the abolitionist cause. And so the Northerners really saw what the African Americans are being returned to, and it makes them angry. The book, however, made the South angry because they said it was an exaggeration, which not every Southern slave experience would have been as harsh as the book, but it is, generally speaking, what the slaves were experiencing. So there's a lot of truth in the novel. Alright, the Whigs Decline. So in the election of 1852, we have the Democrats nominating Franklin Pierce, and you don't actually have to know the Whig's name. His name is Winfield Scott. That kind of gives you an idea of who will win here, or who will lose, I should say. The Whig Party had long been divided over the issue of slavery, and this made them very weak. And on top of that, their main party leader, Henry Clay, had actually died in 1852. So the great compromiser is no longer with us, which is very sad. But he was kind of the glue that held his party together. So Franklin Pierce, the Democrat, will easily win this election. And this is actually the last election that the Whigs ran a candidate. The Whig Party will fall apart after this election. Now, Franklin Pierce was an expansionist, meaning he believed in acquiring more territory for the U.S., and so during his administration, a strip of land just west of Texas was purchased from Mexico to complete the present-day 48 continental states. And that purchase, that strip of land, is known as the Gadsden Purchase. It was purchased so that a southern railroad could be built from California to New Orleans. We'll talk about the Manifest Destiny map activity later. Okay, the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So remember that the Compromise of 1850 established that we would have popular votes determining whether or not slavery would exist in the New Mexico and Utah territories. Well, some people in Congress wanted this for the Nebraska territory as well. The problem was that the Nebraska territory was in the Louisiana Purchase, and so some would argue that the Missouri Compromise would apply to this area. So Stephen Douglas, a senator from Illinois, will introduce a bill that would divide the Nebraska territory into two parts. Nebraska and Kansas. So if you see the screen, or the screen on the PowerPoint, or the PowerPoint on your screen, you'll see that this shows that division. Initially, all of that territory where it says Nebraska and Kansas was all part of only the Nebraska territory. And so they're arguing that it be split into Nebraska and Kansas and allow popular sovereignty in both territories. The North absolutely hated this bill, of course, because they see this as a ploy to turn these northern states into slave states. But the South, of course, supports it. They want the opportunity to keep the balance in the U.S. After months of struggle, the Kansas-Nebraska Act is eventually passed. This will effectively repeal the Missouri Compromise line. And the last thing I want to talk about today is bleeding Kansas, okay? The drama didn't really end with just the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Remember that each territory now gets to decide by vote what they want. Kansas is going to be the more populated territory, so the race is on to see which side, the pro-slave side or the anti-slave side, can populate Kansas with their most supporters to win by popular vote. So once there's enough settlers in a territory, they can organize a government and try to hold elections and vote on this issue. However, thousands of people that lived on the border of Missouri and Kansas actually streamed across the border and voted illegally in favor of slavery. And this is going to infuriate abolitionists. They feel, the abolitionist side feels that if you base it truly on Kansas's population, that the free states, or the free side, had the votes, and you do have people illegally voting because they're not actually Kansas residents. Okay? We have violence between the two groups kind of break out in Kansas. Essentially, both sides attempt to establish their own government, and violence ensues between the two governments, and this earns the territory of Kansas the nickname Bleeding Kansas. Alrighty, we're going to stop here for today and write down any questions you have, and we'll pick up with this idea of Bleeding Kansas and what it leads to next in class on Monday. Have a good weekend.